Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm so very thrilled to welcome Christopher Coake to the podcast today to talk about The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston, released 50 years ago in August of 1971. How are we doing, Chris?
Hi, Brian. It's so great to be here on your podcast. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a chance to talk about a movie made in the year I was born, and which I have not seen, I think, since I was 7 or 8 years old. This was really something to go back and take a look at this. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm excited to talk to you about the movie. Before we get to The Omega Man, I thought I'd just start by asking you kind of what role has film played in your life, and if you have a few favorite films you can share with us.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm 49, almost 50 years old. I was a kid in the 80s, a kid to a teenager in the 80s. So, like every one of my generation, I probably have Steven Spielberg and his peak commercial, films just sort of woven into my DNA. I had a start, in that whole kind of burgeoning blockbuster era. I remember going to see Star Wars in the movie theater. All my friends and I were going to see Ghostbusters and coming back and talking about Ghostbusters and Back to the Future and things like that. So the other thing I would say about that is that I've studied film a little bit. I'm a creative writer. I teach creative writing at UNR, where I worked with you, Brian. And
I think I recognize you from that time I spent at UNR.
Yeah. So I took a couple of classes in my MFA program in film study and liked it a lot. And I'm not going to say that I'm a film theorist. I am not. Mm-hmm. But I have really sort of always looked in on what's happening in contemporary film and trying to educate myself in what's happening or what has happened historically in film. I've begun teaching, this is all I'm qualified to do in film, right? But I've begun teaching a 200 level course at the University of Nevada called Intro to Film Analysis and Interpretation, which I've loved. And so, that gives me a chance to talk with people all the time about how movies are put together. And that's taught me a lot about how to watch and think about film. The other thing that I would say is I want to give a shout out here to Roger Ebert. I discovered Roger Ebert when I was a teenager, first by watching his At the Movies television show with Gene Siskel, but then I began purchasing his year-end collections of his newspaper reviews. And I don't think I'm minimizing it when I say he's one of the most influential writers in my life. Even though I write fiction, there is a part of me that wants to be a film critic because of Roger Ebert. And reading him talking about movies opened the door for me to a lot of stuff that I wouldn't have encountered as, somebody who really liked Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is a great movie, but when I was that age, I just wanted more of that. Roger Ebert taught me to go and look for stuff that's, a little bit more challenging, taught me how to think about art more generally. As a critic, I think he was somebody who was able to make me think about both film and not film in a way that is in my teaching and writing still to this day.
Yeah, I love Roger Ebert. He won the Pulitzer Prize for criticism, I want to say in like 75, very early on in his career as a film critic. And his show, I still watch his show to this day. There's a website that has all the old stuff. And if I just want to, watch an old one for 20 minutes, they're pretty short. And do you ever get a chance to meet him? I got to meet him once at the Sundance Film Festival 2005. And he said one thing to me. He said,
what did he say to you?
He said to me, "I hope you find an honest line of work." That's what he said as he was walking away after I said, "Oh, I'm a huge fan." I didn't get the picture with him with the thumbs up. I did not get that, but I got to say a few words to him once. Yeah, he's really influential film critic. He did not like The Omega Man. I don't know if you look up his review.
He did not. I did. And that was back when he was not, he got a little softer as he got older, but this was back when he wasn't mincing words. No, I never got to meet him. A friend of mine got a book signed by him for me.
Okay.
And I was in the same auditorium with him once. One of the most fantastic things I've ever seen was Ohio State, when I was a student there, hosted a conversation between him and Martin Scorsese.
Oh, wow. And you got to see that live?
Yeah, and they were showing clips, and somebody passed out in the aisles during a clip from Last Temptation of Christ. It was intense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I never, even if I'd met him, I'm too shy around, even moderately famous people. I just would have like stuttered something and he would have said something sarcastic and that would have been it.
That's how it usually happens, right? What are can you tell us like a couple films you show in your 200 level class? What are some films you think is important for college students to see to recognize the power of film?
Yeah, this is always part of the puzzle in teaching that class is coming up. I usually I don't show them in class, but I require the students to watch 10 films.
Okay.
And ideally, they're movies that the university can license so that we can show them streaming with good subtitles and the students don't have to pay for them. So, if I wasn't bound in that way, I might show something entirely different. But I'm still able to get a lot of films in there that are just personally important to me. I don't have to like a movie that I teach, but if I can be enthusiastic about it, I think that helps them see.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So some of my very favorite movies are on the syllabus. Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth, Do the Right Thing by Spike Lee, which I saw as a college student. I'm a white dude who comes from a small town in Indiana that is whiter than Iceland, and watching Do the Right Thing just exploded my mind in college.
Yeah,
it
really great film.
I show him Close Encounters. I saw Close Encounters in the theater when it came out, and so
77,
seared in my brain. The students don't love it as much these days, but I still, it's one of my very favorites.
Do you show them The Sweet Hereafter? I know you love that movie.
I can't get it to stream. That is one of my very favorite.
Okay.
Adam McGowan's The Sweet Hereafter from 1997. It's a movie that means a lot to me personally, and I think it is a really, really fine film, but it's one that I've shown to a lot of other people, and almost nobody feels about it the way that I feel about it. I loved it based on your recommendation. I think it was like year one. We were talking to me about that, and I was really into film in 96, 97 when I was a teenager, and I had not seen that one. I like was vaguely aware of it, but I rented it on Netflix DVD. Still have that to this day, Chris. I still do the Netflix DVD. I'm like one of the only 10 people who do that. You're waving flag. Yeah, I wouldn't have known about that movie, except I was living in Columbus, Ohio at the time, and Columbus had a couple of art theaters. I love living in Reno, Nevada, but I really wish that Reno had an art theater.
Agreed.
Where we could consistently see things like this.
Yeah.
And it just it blew my mind. I mean, it's a movie about grief, as you know. I lost my first wife in 1999 to cancer, and things that talk about grief in really compelling and complex ways are always going to really chime with me. But I think it's just a gorgeous film and beautifully acted and really interesting in terms of its structure. So I don't know that I will ever teach it, but I do manage to mention it to my students once a semester. We watch Rear Window. Hitchcock is problematic these days to think about. Rear Window is still, I mean, that movie just does it for me.
Rear Window, I tell people all the time, like if you've never seen a Hitchcock film, that's, I feel like, the one to show somebody, because it's like it represents kind of all of his sensibilities in that one movie. Like you can really tell what kind of filmmaker he is.
Yeah, and it's like he's almost figured out how bad he is as a human being. It's very much a movie about a nasty male voyeur. Getting his comeuppance. So you can almost see that. You can almost see the light go on. The only film I do make the students go to Netflix and watch Roma, Alfonso Cuarón's Roma.
Oh, right.
A perfect movie, but I think the film over the last few years that's just excited me the most, just visually. I can argue with them and with others about some of the film's themes and the way it approaches things, but it was just such an overwhelming emotional and sensory experience that I want the students to think about that. The second half of the class, we moved to films directed by women.
Oh, cool.
Talk about the male gaze and try to put into context just how masculine cinema's past has been.
Mhm.
So we were the students love this one. We're watching Booksmart.
Love Booksmart. Yeah, I've talked
Booksmart's
about that
great.
on the podcast before. Yeah.
Yeah, Booksmart's fantastic. The French New Wave film by Agnes Varda called Cleo from 5 to 7,
Mhm.
which is really, really good. The Babadook by Jennifer Kent.
Yes.
Um,
I've taught that film before. Love that movie.
yeah, yeah. So those are. We watch Moonlight, which is a great contemporary film. It teaches beautifully, but it's also, the more I've taught it, the more I have seen in that film.
It's a stunning film. Yeah.
It is. So now I know a lot about its sound design, because that's one of the units we put up for. Yeah, so I'm pretty pleased that I give them a slate of, like, I think they're all movies that I can insist have a good critical kind of push behind them. And I think they're all films, even like the subtitled French film from the 50s is not one that the class will universally love, but every time we show it, you can tell there's 3 or 4 in the background who are going to put on berets and where can I watch more of these French movies? Well,
yeah,
that's always fun to do.
Yeah. Do you teach them the Omega Man?
I do not, Brian. And having rewatched the Omega Man, I'm not sure that it's gonna come on the syllabus anytime soon.
This isn't a perfect film, Chris?
Well, people view things differently, Brian. But
this is Tim Burton's film he would take to a desert island movie. If Tim Burton could take one movie to a desert island, he has said in interviews it would be the Omega Man. Isn't that wild?
That actually explains a lot. The mutants in the Omega Man, I mean, there's some similarities to the Oompa Loompas, I think, if I'm remembering his Willy Wonka correctly.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But why that makes sense is because visually the Omega Man, this is the thing, maybe the first thing to say about the Omega Man is I just don't find it scary at all. It's a movie that wants to be scary and it doesn't manage it. It just comes across as weird, like visually and tonally. I don't think it rarely manages to do the things I think it set out to do. And that's right in Burton's wheelhouse.
Mm-hmm.
I was also kind of wondering, I haven't gone to research or anything, but it seems like the sort of movie that like Quentin Tarantino would have some sort of like revisionist.
Yeah. Quentin's come up on the podcast before when I'm doing research on these movies. A lot of the time you'll see, listed in Quentin Tarantino's favorite 20 movies of all time. Like that, it definitely comes up. But so what I wanted to start with, Chris, is just kind of do a rundown of the plot summary for those of our listeners who might not know what the movie's about. And then I have a little bit of trivia and you can chime in with whatever you'd like here. So the film
Can I ask a question before we start? Are we allowed in our discussion to spoil the Omega Man?
Yes. So for the first few weeks of my podcast, I'm like, let's not spoil the ending. And it got to the point where almost every film, there'd be something really of interest to talk about at the end. And I'm like, you know what? It's been out for 50 years.
Yeah. We
can say up front, if you don't want to be spoiled, I tell my listeners, like on social media and stuff, like, this is our film for the coming week. Take a look at it. The idea is that you watch the film and then listen to our chat about it. Not so much that you listen to us talk about it and then go watch it, because we are going to talk about it in detail. Sure. So we need to talk about the last 5 minutes of this movie. It's like really wild.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah. All right. So the film was shot in 1970, but most of it is set in 1977, right? This alternate future via like 1970. So in 1975, biological warfare destroys most of the human race. Charlton Heston plays Robert Neville, a scientist who injects himself with an experimental vaccine at the last minute, which makes him immune, which makes him at first we think he's the only human survivor. We think that he's it. By 1977, he believes he's the only survivor. He spends his days patrolling desolate Los Angeles, I was interested to find out like how they shot some of those wide shots. Do you know how they shot that?
What I read,
what'd you see?
On a Sunday morning when nobody was there.
Yeah. They would just shoot on Sunday morning.
Yeah, I was asking, is that normal litter on the street for like early 70s Los Angeles?
Yeah, there was the the last white shot, if you look closely, you could see like some cars in the back. So I don't know, on a big screen in 1971, like if the audience could be like, there's car. Maybe it's the family. Maybe it's the mutants who are somehow like clouded in their car. They can be out during the day. I don't know.
Somebody's also got to be generating all the smog that we see in the air over Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So the best they could.
So the villains of the movie, it's this members called the Family. It's a cult of plague victims who they turned into nocturnal mutants. One day in a clothing store, Robert sees a human woman who runs away. He's captured by the Family, sentenced to death, nearly burned at the stake when he's rescued by that woman and another man. The woman's played by Rosalind Cash. She's part of a group of survivors living in a nearby compound. Both adults and children make up the survivors, and they are all still vulnerable to the disease that killed off most of the population. So Robert decides he needs to create a serum from his own blood, and that might save these humans who are still with us. So they plan to leave Los Angeles with the survivors, start a new life in the wilderness, but the family of mutants not about to let that happen. Is anything else you want to add to the basic kind of summary of the movie?
No, I think that's enough to get us started. I mean, we've got Neville is living in this sort of fortress he's made out of a
second story.
The set design in the building is actually really good. It's a complicated sort of structure. He's got generators. He's playing games of chess against
like a wooden figure with a hat on. He's not super safe in that space. I mean, they're like shooting like fireballs onto the deck, and he's like, he has to get his fire extinguisher. What a great life. And they just shout, Neville, which is something from the book, right? It's been a while, but
it is something from the book.
I remember that like one figure, right, who knew him when they would go Neville like from outside.
Yeah, so we've got, I mean, this whole story, this is the second of 3 times that folks have tried to make a film adaptation of I Am Legend by Richard Matheson.
Yep.
Which is, I went back and reread that too. It's almost
cool.
a novella. It reads really quickly.
It's short, right?
It kind of holds up. I mean,
okay. 1954 it came out, 1954.
Yeah, I mean, its gender politics are upsetting. It's almost like Rear Window, which is contemporaneous.
Same year.
Yeah, in that it's almost figured out just how toxic it is, but not quite.
Okay.
But it's a fascinating book. It's one of Stephen King's favorite horror novels. It's well written. It's a really sort of interior look at a guy who's lonely. So there's a lot of kind of literary stuff going on in addition to plot. But yeah, it's essentially one guy holed up in a house trying to figure out what to do about the vampires that a plague has turned everyone around him into. And at the end of the book, to spoil it, because we kind of have to spoil it to talk about the adaptations. What happens at the end of I Am Legend is that we find basically Robert Neville, the protagonist of the book, is kind of revealed to be a villain. There are sentient living beings that he's been killing in addition to vampires, and he has to realize at the end that he's their monster. And I think that's really interesting. This is a book about who gets to be the protagonist.
Yeah.
Our traditional hero figure turns out to be not so heroic and has to accept that. So it's been adapted 3 times. I've not seen the first adaptation, The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price, though I'm wondering if maybe I did when I was a child. And because that's the sort of thing I would have watched when I was 7 years old.
The first film version was The Last Man on Earth with Vincent Price. That came out in 1964. Yeah, that is actually my favorite. That's my favorite of the 3.
You like it?
I really like it. It's black and white. It's lower budget, right? So, you don't have the fancy, gruesome effects of like the monsters in the Omega Man. It doesn't have the CGI, of course, from the Will Smith version. But yeah, there's a lot of him alone, just kind of like fighting off the monsters, trying to get in. And it has a very Night of the Living Dead kind of vibe, which is another movie that was inspired, I read very much, by Matheson's novel. So the first version 64, and then Omega Man is the second one in 71. But
And then we get I Am Legend.
Charlton Heston was not aware that anyone had made a film. He read the book on an airplane in 69, 70, somewhere around there. And he said, let's make this into a movie. This would make a great movie. He was not aware that it had been done once with Vincent Price.
I want to see it. I struggle to imagine Vincent Price in that role, but that's the reason to see it.
He doesn't have the machismo of like Will Smith and Charlton Heston, but I love Vincent Price. He's a great actor.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, that's why I kind of want to see it, because the book, I think, wants to talk a little bit about what that machismo is, and and undercut it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not something I think Charlton Heston is wired to do necessarily. The Will Smith movie is really interesting, especially because they had the sort of famous alternate ending that they didn't end up going with, which was at least a little bit more in line with the book.
With the book, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I think about, or that I thought about while thinking about this film, is Invasion of the Body Snatchers, that story, and how it's also been adapted a lot, and has produced, I think, one classic out of its adaptations, the Philip Kaufman 70s version, which I think is desperately scary and kind of cool.
The one with Donald Sutherland.
Yeah. And I've been kind of wondering, like, is it metaphorically, is like the story of Invasion of the Body Snatchers somehow a little bit more flexible for the times, or if there's something about I Am Legend that just has not necessarily translated well. Or it could just be that people keep trying to make movies out of it, and those movies just keep getting they go through the process that movies go through, which is that people get their hands on them and producers intervene and egos appear.
I like the Will Smith movie. I don't think I have revisited it since I saw it opening weekend. A huge fan of the book, and I had seen The Last Man on Earth, and I don't know why. I don't know. Like I like a lot of Charlton Heston's work, especially like in the 50s and 60s. I'm kind of surprised it took me until last night to watch The Omega Man. I'm like, how did I miss this one? I've been a fan of the Matheson book since I was in high school. So I think maybe the title threw me off. Maybe I just wasn't aware it was the same thing. But the Will Smith one is pretty solid. It gets a little bit too CGI for my taste, like the monsters. It's 2007. They haven't quite perfected the look.
Yeah, there's something that's not quite gritty enough about that one. Will Smith is a good actor, though.
Yes.
I went back and rewatched some of that one too. And one thing that Will Smith can do is be alone on screen.
Yes.
They give him the dog to interact with, but still, I think he can do more things with his face than Heston can. Heston, like he's done good things. It's just the movie is not it. When he is alone at the beginning of the film, he does a lot of talking to himself, and it's very showy and stagey talking to himself. And there wasn't this sense of danger in the early part of that movie that
it's kind of it's kind of more relaxed in the Omega Man at the beginning than it is, like, say, at the beginning of I Am Legend with Will Smith.
Right. And we get that sort of like 70s, almost proto-disco orchestral music, which
we're going to talk about the music. I did not like the score of the Omega Man. At one point I said it sounds like something you'd hear at a carousel. And it's supposed to be this violent, exciting, tense scene, and I'm like, what is going on with the score?
Did you look up the composer? It's the same guy who composed the Doctor Who theme.
Okay.
Like, I want to think it's not his fault. Like, if you gave us the Doctor Who music, you're okay forever.
Yeah.
But this one, no.
Did you know, Chris, in 1997, Ridley Scott was very, very close to making a version of I Am Legend with Arnold Schwarzenegger? They were
everything you said was
in pre-production.
Yeah.
So what happened was they were in pre-production. It was going to be a big, like, 100 million plus movie. Batman and Robin comes out, underperforms with Schwarzenegger, and G.I. Jane, directed by Ridley Scott, comes out, underperforms. And the studio got cold feet and they canceled it. But it was like a go movie. They were going to do it. I'm trying to imagine a 1998 film with Schwarzenegger, I Am Legend. I mean, I can see it, but boy.
he's not a man I think of as being able to be alone on screen, right?
You don't like to watch Arnold think for 45 minutes?
Look, Arnold's a smart guy, and I've enjoyed his movies, but I just don't imagine him pulling this off. You need like Ridley Scott, absolutely, the guy who made Alien.
Yeah,
sure.
That was exciting. The idea of Ridley Scott doing I Am Legend. I mean, if he were to do it today, I'd be there first in line. Yeah.
Yeah, and this gets, this is just a little bit of foreshadowing. You're going to ask me later some films to pair with the Omega Man, and now I'm thinking about The Martian.
Oh, okay. With Matt Damon, yeah.
Somebody alone for most of its length. Yeah. Okay. I still want Ridley Scott to do that, but with like Michael Fassbender or something.
Yeah, I don't think Arnold would do it today. I think he's a little bit, what do they say, long in the tooth?
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll talk about that, because my last question about the movie is, if they were to make this film in the 2020s, kind of what do you think they would do with it? So a few more pieces of trivia. Heston wanted Orson Welles to direct the Omega Man. Did you know that?
Oh, I did not know that.
They had worked together on Touch of Evil in 1958. Yeah. And it comes 70, 71, Orson Welles was not in demand by any means. He was trying to get projects off the ground, but that would have been a different film. If Orson Welles had made it, I don't know.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I would love to see, because Welles never did any sort of supernatural genre stuff, right? He never did.
I can think of. I mean, he directed some films that I've looked up on IMDb that I have not seen. He did a couple like genre-ish movies. Like I think he did one called The Stranger from the mid-40s. That's a little bit more of a genre film. I don't think he ever did a supernatural movie, but don't quote me on it.
I would have wanted to see it.
Like just like a really gritty like horror science fiction film from Orson Welles.
Yeah,
that would have been great.
Totally.
So Boris Sagal was the director of this. I guess in his autobiography, Heston said that Sagal lost his temper many times on the set and was hard to work with at times. Which is what you want in a great director, right, Chris? Someone who just loses his temper.
Well, I mean, there's plenty of precedent for that.
Yeah.
All the way up to Joss Whedon and probably still, others we've yet to hear about.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Michael Bay. I don't think he's the easiest guy to work with.
No, Sagal, I mean, he did a lot of TV directing, and this was kind of it, I think, for him, right? Did he get another?
Yeah, I glanced at his filmography. This was kind of the only one I knew of. So yeah, he did mostly television. The
best trivia, I don't want to steal your thunder if you have this as trivia.
Oh no, go for it.
The best Boris Sagal trivia is about his family.
Okay, what?
His daughter? His daughter is Katie Sagal, the actor from Married with Children.
Oh my gosh!
His greatest creative achievement was Katie Sagal.
Katie Sagal is his daughter. Interesting, because I was like, I actually thought, I wonder if he's related to Katie Sagal, because I don't see the spelling of that word with the two A's very often. So that's her dad. Interesting. Yeah, what an interesting actress Katie Sagal is, because for so long it was just Married with Children and she was Peggy. And then you see Sons of Anarchy and you see just what she's capable of. I just thought she was like astonishing on that show. Did you see Sons of Anarchy?
I have not. Okay. But anything that I've seen her do, I think she's just, she's really terrific.
Yeah, she can do both comedy and drama. So
yeah,
good on you, Boris. Nicely done.
Yeah. Just like he planned it.
So also in Charlton Heston's, he was doing a diary while making the Omega Man. I don't know if any of that's been published, but I guess he was writing about how he was tiring of action movie roles around this time. So early 70s. So Planet of the Apes was 3 years before this. And then Omega Man comes in 71. Around this time, he's like, yeah, I'm kind of getting tired of these action movie roles. But then you look at his filmography for the rest of the 70s and it's like Earthquake. Like he's in some big like action films. I have not seen them, but I'm assuming he kept doing action at least for a few more years after this.
Yeah, he's literally long in the tooth in the Omega Man, right?
Okay.
He's got a discomforting grin whenever he has to show pleasure, but he's also he's an older guy. And I'm an older guy, right? Like, you know, it happens.
Yeah.
But one of the things I definitely noticed watching the Omega Man that I think it's probably a role for somebody a little bit younger.
He's about 10 plus years too old for this role.
Yeah, that's my ageist and probably uncomfortable take on that. But yeah, there was something. This is all a part of the bigger thesis with just Charlton Heston seemed miscast in this movie to me.
Okay.
What they kept asking him to do, I just didn't buy him doing it. He's got presence, he's got, you know, this great voice and everything, but yeah, I just didn't see it.
Something along those lines is his romance with the female lead. That's where I was like, no. I mean, he kind of feels like he feels too old for that to really work on a narrative level. I don't know.
Well, I mean, the movie gets all sorts of leeway in any romance that it was going to try for, because they're two of the last human beings on Earth. So if anybody was going to enjoy themselves, you know, you just have to go with what's available, I think. But it does seem, and you know, you probably read this too, this is one of the earlier, if not the, Whoopi Goldberg thought it was one of the earliest interracial kisses.
Interracial kisses. It had been done on Star Trek. Was that before this? Was that like late 60s? Well, because that show was 66 to 69, so it would have been.
Yeah, Star Trek came first. But you know, and it depends on, you know, like which races and representation we're talking about. But as far as a white man kissing a black woman, camera.
Played by Rosalind Cash in this movie.
Yeah.
I did read something problematic that like she had him on a show or something, and he said, "Well, I'll demonstrate it on you, Whoopi," and like he kissed her on the show. like in the early 90s, Charlton Heston. I'm like,
yeah,
okay.
Well, I mean, you can make that sound about a lot of Heston's later life too.
Which we'll get to for sure.
Yeah.
So the female lead, Cash, she felt a little strange having a love scene with Charlton Heston. And Heston talked about, I realized in the 70s, a lot of these women I was having like love scenes with or kissing, they had like grown up with me and had seen me in, you know, big films like Ben-Hur and 10 Commandments. And so Cash said at the time, she said, "It's a spooky feeling to screw Moses." Like, I thought that was
hashtag too real. Yeah.
It's not like, I mean, the scene is pretty brief. It's not like the director hangs on them like making love for 5 minutes or something. You know, it's pretty brief.
It's a fairly frank movie for all of that.
Rated PG, Chris.
But they talk about birth control, and I gather there are deleted scenes where she gets pregnant and has to sort of deal with that. But yeah, that was not, and it's not her fault. You know, I think she does in the role, but you know, as far as chemistry goes, I wasn't. It wasn't leaping off the screen.
But something else I'm always intrigued by is the MPA rating system. Like when you look at films from the 70s, Chris, a lot of these films rated PG, even G sometimes have like problematic material. Sometimes, you know, here we get a PG rated movie where we see her breasts like full on for a whole shot. And I'm like, oh, okay. You can't do that today for PG because they didn't have PG-13 in the 70s. So it was movies that just straddled that line. I always think about Jaws being PG.
Yeah,
like I remember being like 7 years old, and I remember like the parents saying, "We're gonna put on Jaws and it's PG, it'll be fine." And I was like racing out of the room. This was like too much.
Yeah, Jaws in particular, that was a film my parents took me to see in the movie theater, and they led me right out of the theater not into Jaws.
At age five, you're sitting there and this naked woman is floating in the water, and Spielberg's like moving the camera up to the top, and your parents are like, "We're out of here."
No, I think I made it through that, but it was when somebody got a limb bitten off, then I was dragged screaming out of the theater.
You didn't get to Robert Shaw's iconic moment on the boat?
Not until much later, no.
That's the part where I had to leave as a 7-year-old.
Yeah. Hey, you made it quite a ways, Brian.
I made it almost. I was so close to the explosion of the shark. So let's see a couple other things. The movie only made $4 million at the box office. Didn't do well critically either. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars out of 4. He said the mutants were a little too ridiculous to fulfill their function in the movie. Gene Siskel gave it 1 star. This is in 71. So they do not start their first version of their show until 75. So they're 4 years out from their partnership. But so, and I looked, there were like 3 other reviews I found. They were all negative on the movie, but Tim Burton likes it. So there you go. And Richard Matheson said the movie didn't bother him that much because he said it was so far removed from his book that he could just kind of enjoy it as a movie. Didn't really bother him. That's what he said.
Yeah, there's very little of that. Very little of the book survives.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember like which of the 3 films is most like the book. I don't know. It's been a while since I saw the Price version, but I'm assuming probably the Omega Man is the least like the book of the 3.
From what I've read, that's what I've seen too. Though apparently Matheson did not like The Last Man on Earth. He changed his name in the credits.
Oh, okay. And was he alive in 07? I don't know if he was alive to see the Will Smith version.
That's a good question. I do not know either.
But I'm thinking the Will Smith version might be the closest one to the book.
Depending on, maybe if we go with the alternate ending.
If you go with the alternate ending, exactly. All right, Chris. So what are your thoughts on the Omega Man? What did you make of this movie?
Well, I didn't like it.
Didn't hold up, huh?
Yeah, I wanted to like it. I did. And there's a few reasons. One, okay, it's a weird movie to watch now, right? And you can say that of any movie that has some historical distance between here and now. But this is a film that's talking about the results of a pandemic. So watching it right now is, quite something.
A little triggering. I wrote in my notes, triggering.
Yeah, I mean, I give the movie and Charlton Heston's character a lot of credit for being very pro-vaccine. Yes. That's nice.
Mm-hmm. He wanted to give it to more people.
He did.
He was in his helicopter.
The mutants don't want help.
Yep.
There's some resonance there that nobody ever intended.
Yeah.
But also just thinking about Heston, like what I gather is that this is right at the period in his life where he was kind of making this remarkable shift from somebody who had been fairly progressive as a younger man and who had been a big proponent of the civil rights movement. And I was reading that he'd picketed theaters that were, trying to segregate.
Oh, okay.
In some way or another. Mm-hmm. So he had that really good track record, and then he began moving to the right.
Okay.
And becoming a pro-gun activist. And watching now, a guy who I know would go on to be president of the NRA for many years, blow away people who are pretty clearly meant to represent the counterculture. Like hippies, maybe more broadly, the Manson family at the time. We got to talk about, how they're represented here. Mm-hmm. There's some discomfort there too. Thinking about the film and race is really weird. That's where it gets almost incoherent, like,
okay. Yeah.
It's a very racially mixed cast, which, is good to see, and especially good to see in a film from the early 70s. Mm-hmm. But we have a disease that makes everybody white, like
including like a pretty standout African-American actor in the makeup who has a very grisly death. Right. Yep. Like where he falls over and he gets staked through the heart. And so it makes them pale whites. What's that about?
Yeah. And so you've got this weird, well, I don't know, but it's just, I can't help but think about it now. Rosalind Cash, I mean, here we get into spoilers. At the end of the movie, she succumbs to the disease that has been slowly working on her. And so one of the big reveals at the end is that she's become albino is the word too.
Yeah, albino. Her hair is all white now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the very last things we see is Charlton Heston, giving a cure over to people that will help restore her to health and to her blackness. That's just I pointed out without having I don't know what the film might have intended to say about race, but what it does end up saying about race, especially given Heston's shift in life. Like he made some speeches later on in life too about the encroachment of wokeness and how nobody wanted to hear from old white guys anymore, right? Like that doesn't those resonances work against each other in a lot of ways. And then too, this is a movie that clearly it's trying to invoke the Manson family in its mutants, right? They call each other they're a murderous family with a capital F. They have culty sort of counterculture things to say. That was going to age weirdly no matter what. And now when I look at it, it seems like the movie is trying and really struggling to say something about the counterculture at the time. There's an early scene where Heston's Robert Neville goes into an old movie theater and
watches Woodstock.
He watches Woodstock.
Of all movies.
Going to Fish, which is really interesting, right? And he seems to really love that movie, maybe because it's the only thing he can watch. But and he says they don't make him like this anymore. Haha.
Which came out in 1970.
But the movie's central, like the movie's central politics are something that I'm still trying to wrestle with. Because at the end we have, Heston is this super masculine, shirtless white guy savior. He knows how to solve everything. He's got the science, he's got the medicine, he's got he sacrifices himself in some of the most obvious Christ imagery that I've ever seen in a movie.
He's literally like on the fountain. I'm like, oh, that's subtle.
In the last 5 minutes of the film, he is stabbed by a spear, gives over his blood to help save humanity, and then dies with his arms out and his legs tucked under him. And like, oh my God. So, and some of this is accident, things that would have read more complexly in 1971, just aren't going to 50 years later. But this is not a movie that got more interesting in what it had to say over time. As opposed, and it just within the last year, I went back and rewatched the Philip Kaufman Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and that is a movie that I think mostly holds up. And they're interesting films to compare against each other too, not only because they're adaptations of good books, but the metaphors seem to just hold up a little bit better in that other one. And it might be because of the skill of the filmmaking, that they knew what they were doing a little bit more. But the Omega Man just doesn't. I mean, we talked about the music. The music doesn't know how to support what's on.
It doesn't even feel like this movie has a composer. It feels like the director had a week and he's like, okay, let me just throw some stuff together here. It's just not, unlike a film I'm also talking about this weekend, Chris, Clute, with Jane Fonda, the music is sensational. Like the music fits every scene so beautifully. It gives it this eerie kind of tense quality throughout the mystery. And I watched that within 24 hours of the Omega Man. And I'm like watching the Omega Man and listening to the music. And I'm like, what's the director trying to go for here?
I haven't seen Clute. I would very much like to. Is that's worth checking out, right?
Oh, it's worth checking out. It's definitely more successful in terms of a character study about Jane Fonda and Donald Sutherland, who's the male lead of the movie, than it is a like mystery thriller. Like the plot of the movie is a little clunky, and the ending, it kind of feels like an afterthought almost. But as a character study, it's one of the best films I've looked at this year for the podcast, for sure. More complexity than the Omega.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'll move that up on my list. I'm a huge Donald Sutherland fan. I think that he elevates everything that he's in.
We've talked about him a lot on the podcast. He, of course, like his big breakthrough was MASH, which came out in early 1970. I talked about MASH in the very first episode. And then he's been in 2 films. We've looked at Little Murders. He has a small role. And Johnny Got His Gun, the only film directed by Dalton Trumbo. Sutherland plays a supporting role. And in the 2 films we've talked about so far, he's like playing these crazy wild characters, and in Clute he's very reserved, and it's a whole different performance from him. So it's really interesting. Not quite as reserved as Charlton Heston in the Omega Man.
What if Donald Sutherland had gotten the role?
Sutherland would have been very. I mean, it's kind of tricky to picture Sutherland. I mean, in 1970, he's like maybe 30. I mean, he's pretty young. I think, but you're right though. I think a younger actor might have been better for this material. I mean, they have to be old enough you believe them to be a scientist, I guess. But, I guess. Do we believe that Heston is an intelligent scientist? That's a little bit of a stretch.
The military man part of his character works a little bit better for him. It's just, I mean, whatever else Heston can do, I don't think that he's super skilled at evoking an inner life.
Yeah.
You know, everything is staged, and
Mhm.
it's always hard to talk about this with acting too, because you have to bring the directing into it as well. Like, what takes did they go with? What did they leave? What instruction did he get?
Mhm.
Um, and Boris Sagal there are a few really interesting compositions here. You know, some of the shots of the mutants where they're all wearing sunglasses and the, lights
Mhm.
reflect in them, that has some chill to it. But a lot of the movie is just sort of getting the job done.
Mm. Mhm.
Shots of rooms. It's always kind of we're
Yeah,
not
there's
seeing
nothing really that interesting with the cinematography here, right? In terms of like the way
right.
the camera moves, it's a lot of like just camera on sticks, and
Yeah.
the Heston is the show, and that's who we care about, and there's not a whole lot going on in terms of like interesting cinematography or editing or sound. I mean, it's kind of your basics, like let's just get to the ending, like not a
Yeah.
whole lot. I mean, I
I
do
mean,
think it's interesting that they have an African American in the female lead. I mean, you talked about that. That's been
yeah.
a problematic element of a lot of the movies we've looked at in the podcast. A lot of old, straight, white male directors and all white casts, movie after movie after movie, and it's like, okay, like that's been kind of the hardest part of this. Looking at films from 50 years ago,
Yeah.
I love films from the 1970s. I've already seen 10 or more films I probably never would have seen and that I love. So this
Mhm.
has been a really cool project, but that has been problematic. There's a lot of films that they're clearly not having that discussion in pre-production. Like, what if we got a female lead who was African American, or
Yeah.
like let's mix it up.
Yeah. And the movie kind of, I think when it's at its best, there's a couple of scenes where those two characters are talking and kind of acknowledge the differences between them in
Mm-hmm.
a sort of like, we both know what's going on, and and the movie knows it too.
Yeah.
Um, and that's kind of nice to see. There's a naturalness, I think, to the way the movie wants to address race, um, that I agree with you. I don't often see, from films, even the ones made now. I think get it wrong all the time.
Yeah.
Um,
Especially
you know,
like an action film released in the summer of 1971. This
yeah,
is an interesting time for movies too, Chris, because we don't really have summer movie seasons in
right.
1971. Like I mean, you know what came out in the summer of 71? We get like McCabe and Mrs. Miller by Robert Altman. We get Carnal Knowledge, Jack Nicholson film by Mike Nichols. I mean, we are not getting blockbuster films. I mean, I would say The Omega Man might be the closest thing to like a movie we might get in a summer now in the theater. Like there's not a whole lot of action films, which I find interesting. 50 years ago.
No, no, and maybe if it was released 4 or 5 years later. But when did Jaws come out?
Jaws was June of 75. That is considered the first summer
Big summer.
blockbuster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe the Omega Man just got there a tiny bit early.
Yeah. Maybe if it come out in 76 or 77, it would have done better. I don't know.
What if Boris Sagal had seen a Steven Spielberg film before making this one? I mean, we might have gotten something. Yeah, I mean, he was a TV director, and there's some great stuff made for TV now. But
Mm-hmm.
like, I'm thinking of the scene where Neville first encounters Lisa, and she's
At the clothing store. Yeah.
Yeah,
And she's like,
and I kind of had to stop. I was laughing so hard, I had to like stop that.
I mean, there's like 3 cuts to Heston. He's kind of like narrowing his eyes, kind of looking across the room. And she's like got that weird pose.
It's such a sitcom kind of thing.
It was pretty silly.
Yeah, that that I think is kind of unfortunately all over this movie.
Yeah. I mean, not to say that, this is all Seagal's fault by any means, but I do think, like, especially tonally, it's kind of all over the place throughout the movie. The first half feels very different from the second half. It almost kind of settles down into this, like, kind of quiet romance in the second half. And I'm like, wasn't this supposed to be a thriller of some kind? Like, I feel like Seagal needed to balance the threads a little bit better.
And I also don't think the movie does a particularly good job of kind of, like we talked about earlier, of setting up the danger.
Yeah.
Like,
you don't really feel the threat that like you should, right?
No. And at one point they like throw a fireball at his building, and
he rolls his eyes.
It just is very easy to put out. Like, I don't feel like they're trying really that hard to get him.
Yeah.
And That's something I have a couple of questions about the book and the way it establishes that danger too. But that's one of the things the book mostly gets very right, is it's just tense. You don't know how this character is going to survive. It's a third person story, so he might not. And without that tension and without Heston giving the sort of performance that lets me see, he's got this very theatrical kind of like, am I crazy or am I not sort of performance that doesn't, I don't feel suspense there either. And even when because I'd kind of forgotten the ending of the movie, even when I realized at the end he's probably not going to make it out, I wasn't necessarily crushed by this.
You weren't weeping at the end of this film?
No, or even thinking like, because I don't necessarily weep for Neville at the end of the book either, but I've gotten to know him well enough that I know where he is at that point. And I think I could say of Will Smith too, like, he's an actor, he's a really good actor, and he is somebody who can, let you know what he's thinking behind his eyes. So yeah, I just found it, I found it a very flat movie.
What did you like best about it? What are maybe a couple things you liked? Anything that any scenes or moments you thought worked? Like, I like the helicopter flashback, like when that goes down and he's bleeding all over and he's crawling to get to the vaccine. I thought that scene worked well. There were some things I liked. The first 45 minutes, I was kind of on board, even though I could recognize some flaws.
Yeah, but empty, the empty Los Angeles has some of the same resonance as like empty London and 28 Days Later.
Yeah.
And watching him watch Woodstock, that was nothing I remembered from a kid. I'm like, wow, where is this film going? There's the scene where he has to go down into that wine cellar. Right. The one legitimately scary moment in the movie is, we don't know what's down there, and we see a mutant before he sees a mutant. Yeah. I really like. I think when the mutants start to talk, we lose a little bit of what goes on with them.
I'm like, they're talking seriously? Yeah. Come on.
Well, they're just, again, okay. So again, right? Like, one of the things I love about the book is that, it kind of wants to make us question who gets to be the protagonist, right? Why is this person our hero? What's happening to these people over here? Can they actually be heroes too? I don't get the sense watching the Omega Man that much thought was given to the mutant's own perspective.
Okay. They were just the bad guy.
Yeah, they're villains. Yeah. But I do like, there are times when I almost see it there. When they're all sitting there with their sunglasses on, I think that's really kind of, like just visually interesting. Anthony Zerbe is a pretty good actor. I think, he does what he can with that role. The guy who plays Zachary is a pretty good actor. He comes to a bad end, as they all do eventually. But, he's good. I thought Rosalind Cash was really good. She, she's trying her best with a script that doesn't necessarily give her all she needs.
Did you recognize anyone else in this movie besides Heston? Because they were all new to me.
I had seen Zerbe before.
Okay.
I had to go look him up. He was a Bond villain.
Oh, which one? Do you know?
It was one of the Timothy Dalton ones, I think. Licensed.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. He's after Heston, he's had the longest or maybe most prominent career. Everybody else got work. I'm looking at my notes over here.
Yeah, I saw Cash passed away in her 50s of cancer, so she died young.
Yeah. Eric Laneuville, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who plays Richie. The kid they save.
I liked him a lot. He was good in the film.
He was good, and he went on to be a very accomplished TV director.
Oh, cool.
And made like literally hundreds of episodes of shows.
Oh, nice.
So I'm hoping that he got a chance to talk with Boris Sagal behind the scenes and kind of figure out what's up, and get the leg up that way. I mean, at its best, this was a movie I didn't mind.
Yeah, it's 90 minutes. It's short. Yeah. It doesn't overstay its welcome.
Yeah. But there are parts of it too that I'm just like, come on. The ending in particular.
The ending's really strange in that you think he's dying in the fountain, and then it fades to black, and then it fades into the next day, and it doesn't really feel like it's been an hour. It feels like it's been like 12 hours. Yeah. And he's still sitting there, and he still, after many hours, has enough energy to kind of sit up and hand over the blood. And I'm like, and then he died.
Life-giving blood. Yeah.
Like that was like a weird, like it needed to, I think, to end during the night. It was a strange, like non-ending. Like I'm like, okay.
Yeah, and the whole Christ pose thing, it's so awkward. You can almost see Heston like trying to get into that position.
Yeah. Okay. Dying now.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Yeah. No, it's not even close to one of the worst films I've looked at for this podcast since last year. I mean, I had a good time with it. I was never bored. You know, I'm a huge fan of the Matheson book, so I was like kind of interested. And, you know, I mean, I find Heston an interesting actor. Like one of my favorite films is Planet of the Apes from '68. And, you know, he made this soon after that. And, you know, so I was kind of on board in those early scenes of him just wandering around desolate LA. And I thought that was kind of cool. I was like wondering, I was like, how did they film all this in 71? You don't have CGI effects yet. So I'm like, oh, they just shot it on a Sunday morning. Okay. I guess that's how you do it in the early 70s. But yeah, once it kind of settles down into more of like a drama in the second half, and we're not scared of the mutants very much by the second half, and it just kind of fell apart for me. But I was still on board with watching it. I wasn't tuned out by any means. I mean, I think if you're interested in the novel, and if you've seen maybe one or two of the other versions, it's not a horrible way to spend 90 minutes. It's just not great.
Yeah, that's it. It's by far, it's nowhere near the worst movie I've seen either. I wanted my childhood memories to have a little bit more spark when I went back and looked at them.
Sometimes it happens. Sometimes at 5, 6, 7, we love something, and then you watch it when you're older, and you're like, "Oh my God, I can't even watch another minute of this. This is so bad." That happens sometimes. Yeah. So my last question about the movie, Chris, is if they were to make I Am Legend, not even really the Omega Man, if they were to redo I Am Legend, the novel today in the 2020s, what do you think would be the way to do it? Like, any ideas of like directors or actors, or kind of like, how do you think what would make a really good adaptation of that book today?
I think somebody could do a really good job of it. Because I mean, we have so many actors right now who I think could, you know, just sort of inhabit that role. You know, like I thought of Michael Fassbender immediately. You know,
that'd be great.
But I mean, we have so many good horror directors right now. A movie that I like to think about in concert with the Omega Man is Midsummer by Ari Aster.
Yeah, I wrote down Ari Aster of Hereditary and Midsommar would be great for this.
Well, he knows atmosphere. He knows how to build dread when, you know, monsters aren't on screen. I think that he could, just the imagery in those two movies, I think really chimes with what an adaptation of I Am Legend requires. Plus, Midsummer 2 is all about kind of like unsettling other society, right? You know, a sort of culty construction. And I think that would be really interesting to kind of to play out. Or I'm blanking on his name. Robert Eggers, the guy who did The Witch. And Lighthouse, you know, or, you know, change it up, you know, make Robert Neville a woman character and watch somebody else try to develop this. But I do think, I mean, the novel is interesting to go back and look at now, because I think some of what it is trying to say is stuff that we have culturally come back to ask ourselves. You know, whose story gets to be told?
Yeah.
You know, why are we invested in this character? You know, what about Robert Neville's masculinity in the book prevents him from seeing certain things that he might otherwise see? That I think would be a really interesting take to look at now. And I don't think it would require much money, and some streaming service just throw a whole bunch of resources.
Netflix can just throw however much money. But yeah, I think the way to do it now would not be to do like the big I Am Legend from 07 with Will Smith with the CG effects. I would love to see much more pared down, kind of quieter version.
Jordan Peele, I Am
Jordan
Legend.
Peele.
There you go.
Right? How about Jordan Peele reunites with Lupita Nyong'o and does I Am Legend with her? Like, that would be an event.
I'm there opening night.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Yeah.
I would love something like that.
Well, I mean, let's think. I hadn't thought about this before the conversation just went there, but think about Us. Think about Jordan Peele's Us.
Yeah.
That is, there's some I Am Legend in that story.
Yeah,
Right?
there's a lot in that house. There's like these creatures from the outside who break in. There is some I Am Legend in Us. Yeah.
Who are misunderstood and who turn
Mhm.
out to have, that protagonist kind of question. So maybe Jordan Peele has already made I Am Legend and we just didn't
Yeah.
notice.
Peele's like, already did that one.
Yeah.
I'll find another classic horror novel to do.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's not great. It's not terrible. It's one of those kind of in the middle. I'm glad I watched it once. It's not one I'll probably ever watch again. I mean, I'm not a Charlton Heston completist by any means. So.
Yeah, me neither.
But like, I would say, if you're desperate to watch an older Heston movie, just go put on Planet of the Apes again. I think that's a better film overall.
Or Soylent Green.
Soylent Green, which I have not seen before, Chris. I know of it kind of, and I think I might even know the ending. Like I think someone spoiled the ending to me once.
Probably
I saw it on The Simpsons or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's another one I haven't seen since I was a kid.
But that was 73. Yeah. So I will probably do an episode on that in the months to come. Another Charlton Heston kind of, science fiction movie. So that takes us to our final two segments, Chris. The first one is called the Divine Double Features, where we pick a more modern film to pair with the Omega Man. What did you go with for a more modern take on something kind of similar?
Yeah, I've already kind of spoiled that. Midsummer, I think, would be a really interesting pairing. The other one I was thinking about, which is also not a movie I like very much, is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Okay.
Which, wants to invoke the Manson family, and I think is also kind of interested in looking at like, an older type of masculinity and how that translates. So we've got a protagonist in that movie, the Leonardo DiCaprio character, whose time has kind of passed.
Yeah.
In terms of movie making and the sort of person he wants to be. I think that they talk to each other in interesting ways. I don't like either of those movies all that much, so that's not a double feature I might go to. But
you don't like the ending of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood?
I do not. And I'm more or less a Tarantino fan.
Okay.
So I like a great deal. This is not one that I think was as successful as other people did.
Okay. Yeah, I liked Hereditary more than Midsommar, but boy, I mean, for a young director to have those as his first two films, even though there were some flaws, some things I didn't like so much about his second film, like really striking. I feel like if you're interested in the genre at all, it's like those are two films you have to kind of see, for modern horror.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I came out of the theater from each of those movies thinking that was really interesting but flawed. And the more I thought about them, the more they kind of grew in my head. I think he's a far better visual craftsperson than a storyteller necessarily. Because I don't think the plots of either of those films are all that strong.
Okay.
But he elevates them by imagery that I will never get out of my head.
Yeah, and gets great actors. Toni Collette is phenomenal in Hereditary. That's probably Florence Pugh, who's really just come on the scene in so many great ways. She's so great in Little Women, and she's in Black Widow, and I'm excited to see what she does next. And so I think those are both great choices. I went with a really kind of random pick that I haven't seen in a long time, but it's one I saw at the Los Angeles Film Festival in 2006. It's called Right at Your Door, starring Mary McCormick. Have you heard of this movie?
No.
It came out a year before I Am Legend. It's very similar in storyline in that it's someone like in their house barricading themselves from outside forces trying to get in. And it's more of like a virus kind of plague movie. I don't know if people would necessarily like to watch it today, but it's one of those that was made on a very low budget. There's, doesn't have any like real effects of any kind, but the director got two great actors in it. One's Mary McCormick, and they're just stuck in their house, or she's like trying to get in the house, and the guy's inside, and he's not sure if he can let his wife in because she might be infected. And it's one of those, I think a lot of it's like in real time. And I saw it in a crowded theater at the LA Film Festival in 2006, and it was my favorite film of the festival. And it's not a movie that anybody talks about now. And I remember just loving it. And when they got to the Q&A, they had the director and the two cast members. And my question was this inspired by Richard Matheson's I Am Legend? And they said, no. That's all they said.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm like, this kind of has a feeling of Matheson's I Am Legend. I'm just curious if you could talk about that a little. And the director went, no. But I appreciated the film anyway, and I do think there's a lot of inspiration from at least that style of storytelling. So if you've never heard of it before, I don't even know if it's streaming anywhere. Check it out. It's like a cool little indie flick from 2006.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So our last segment's about Mr. Charlton Heston. What do you make of this guy, Chris? His career, his life outside of film. Do you have a couple favorites of his in the movie world?
I am far from a Heston completist. You know, like I saw this one when I was a kid. I've seen Touch of Evil. I've seen and Touch of Evil's great, right? But
it's been a while since I've seen Touch of Evil. Isn't there something problematic about him in that movie? Doesn't he play like another ethnicity? Like I'm trying to remember. Right?
Yeah, he's in brownface.
He's in brownface.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
And he complained about that later. You know, the idea. He died before we started having, you know, I think more open conversations about these things. But he still did complain in sort of a late speech about the idea that white actors couldn't, you know, branch out and play other ethnicities.
Okay,
which is not something that's aged well at all. Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to separate my feelings about his politics. You know, like later in his life, he was the head of an organization I do not like and do not support, and so you know, it's a little bit difficult for me to go back and look at his work with a whole lot of admiration.
Okay.
On the other hand, I am a big fan of and teach Alfred Hitchcock, who was a very problematic human being, and made some works of genius that have changed my life. So it's, you know, very selective in terms of who bothers me and who doesn't. And, you know,
it's tricky. I've said on the podcast, I've said on the podcast before, Alfred Hitchcock has always been, since I was in high school, my favorite director. And I've read a couple biographies on him, and the story with Tippi Hedren is very problematic and strikingly disturbing. And you're like, okay, I mean, but he's made probably 7-8 films that are in my top 30 films. Like he has so many films I adore that's been kind of a hard kind of trying to wrap my mind around that, you know, like because he makes such great films. It's like, why can't you just be a good human being? You know?
Yeah. I mean, you know, Heston, he did a lot of good in his life. He did a lot of not so good in his life. But I can't watch the Omega Man. I can't watch that first scene where he jumps out of his convertible with an automatic weapon and fires at a window.
Without thinking about the NRA.
Yeah, well, there it is.
There it is.
And you know, maybe some of that thinking prevents me from seeing him in other ways. But I also, you know, like I've watched a lot of performances by actors who weren't great people, and he's just, you know, like okay. So I'm thinking about the last time I taught Rear Window, and you know, me and my class talking about Jimmy Stewart's performance. You know, like Stewart was not he's not a naturalistic actor in the way we might expect somebody to be today, but he's still a fantastic actor. My wife and I watched, I've never seen the Philadelphia Story, and I watched that for the first time during lockdown.
It's a delightful film, yeah.
It's a great film, and Jimmy Stewart is great in it, you know, playing this young, gangly, he's got one of the great drunk scenes of all time. You know, like I think that there's a difference between an actor who can, you know, I think believably move between different sorts of reinventions of himself, and somebody like Heston, who I think never stops being Heston.
Yeah, has he ever disappeared into a role? I can't think of one.
Thank you. You said much more concisely what I was trying to get at. And you know, fine. Keanu Reeves doesn't really disappear into a role, and I love that guy.
Yeah,
Schwarzenegger is always Schwarzenegger. And
Schwarzenegger. I feel like he tried. He would like try to do other stuff, and people were like, "No."
Yeah, you're just not going to get the nuance. But yeah, that's every time Charlton Heston was on the screen in this film, I was just saying to myself, "Oh, it's Charlton Heston doing something." Yeah, I was never like, "That's Robert Neville, who is doing this and this for these reasons."
Yeah. Now, Charlton Heston won an Academy Award for Best Actor. Did you know that?
I
Do you know what film
certainly
it was
read
for?
that before. Which film was it? Was it
Ben-Hur. He
Sleeping
won
Minutes? Oh, it was
Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur. A
Yeah.
film I've not seen since childhood. But
Okay. So
yeah,
someone liked as acting at one point.
oh, sure. And I get it. I think, he has screen command. It was just, not deployed in the ways that one would hope.
So if you had to pick like a favorite, if there was one that you like more than the others, what would it be?
Well, I've not rewatched Soylent Green, so I can't say for sure, but I remember liking Soylent Green a lot. Okay. I'm going to go back and rewatch it and kind of see if I have the same problem. So we'll go with that one. Or, Touch of Evil, not a classic. So maybe we just say Touch of Evil, and people can sort out the problematic stuff for themselves.
Yeah.
I remember being bored senseless by Ben-Hur, and Planet of the Apes is a good movie. I've not seen. Okay. You know what it is, Brian? I'm not a big Planet of the Apes guy.
Okay. You didn't see the new ones. Like, you're not really big into that series.
I saw the first of the new ones, which I thought was good. A friend of mine is married to the director of the first of the new ones, so I wanted to see that. Yeah, and I get they're supposed to be pretty good. I'm just not compelled by the story of the sentient apes.
Yeah,
the magic of filmmaking has not convinced me that that's like,
So he's been a part of some films I like. I like Will Penny from 1967, a Western starring Donald Pleasance as a really creepy bad guy. Is a film I watched a few years ago that I liked. And then Touch of Evil, as you said. Ben-Hur, you have to kind of be in the mood for a giant widescreen 50s epic film, but I would pick that one over 10 Commandments. Like, if I had to watch one of the two, I think Ben-Hur is like a more striking film. A lot of interesting, that's one of like the giant epics of that period. And what's cool about those kind of movies, Cleopatra is another one from the early 60s, where everything you're seeing on the screen they really had to build for every shot. And they'll have those wide shots of like 300 extras and these giant sets, and it's all really there. And that always kind of excites me when I'm watching some of those older films. Now, today, you don't know what's real and what's not when you watch a movie, right? So, there's some things I admire in Ben-Hur, but yeah, my favorite film of his is Planet of the Apes from '68. I saw it for the first time in middle school, and it's just I love the story. I think that's the film that suits Heston the best. I just think he's like a great choice for that particular story, and the way he kind of integrates himself into that ensemble of ape characters. And yeah, I've always liked the original. That's still my favorite of all. Like, I love the new ones too, but I think the original still holds up really well. 53 years since it came out.
Yeah, it's been a long time since I've seen that too. Probably shirtless Heston works better in that movie than.
Yeah, he's shirtless a lot, and I think he's almost naked at some point.
You hire Charlton Heston, you got to get that shirt off. That's what he's there for.
That's right. Exactly. All right, Chris. So that takes us to the end of our talker. This has been so much fun. I'd love to end by you just telling us a little bit more about your books. I have one of them for those of you watching this podcast. You would have told me not to. Stories by Christopher Coake is on sale now. One of my favorite reads of 2020. I recommend all of you go check it out.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, well, that's the book that I would promote. I've written two others. Probably most germane to this podcast is I have a novel from 2012 called You Came Back. And that, in a very strange turn of events, was adapted into an Italian language feature film.
That's right.
The last few years. So I've got one of the reasons I've been thinking so much about Omega Man is I've been thinking about film adaptation quite a lot. I had nothing to do with the making of the Italian movie aside from giving them permission, but my wife and I finally got to watch that film recently. It's not streaming in the States yet, as far as I know. It's called Passione Dare. One of these days it'll probably be on Amazon, cool. Buried deep in the menus. Exactly. It's a C+ film. I don't think that my attachment to my own book is guiding that review. It's but it's surreal. It's surreal to watch some people, take a story and turn it into something else.
That must have been wild, Chris, to watch a film that's based on something that you spent years of your life working on. That must have been pretty surreal.
It was surreal. Seeing my name in the credits was great. Watching I will say this, the filmmakers made an honest attempt to get my book like the things that I wanted to say, I think they were also trying to say. But it's a book that's set in Columbus, Ohio, where I used to live, and the movie is set in Venice and is in Italian, and the characters' names have changed, and it's just surreal. So that happened.
Has anyone?
I'm glad it happened.
I'm curious, Chris. Has anyone reached out to you about adapting Big Guy into a film? I think that would make an astonishing film. Has anyone reached out to you about your final novella? Like the longest story in your new collection. I just thought was astounding, and I would love for like a really talented filmmaker to get his hands on it. I think that could be a really strong film.
Well, thank you. Me too. I would love to see that happen as well. But you never know. Books go out in the world and they stay there for a long time. The story collection, the book you held up, you would have told me not to, is I think my strongest work. Other people might disagree, but I'm really proud of it. But it came out during the pandemic. We couldn't promote it. It's a literary story collection, so people don't run to the bookstore the moment those drop. But I did not expect that my book published in 2012 would eventually get made into a movie in Italy. These things have weird lives.
There you go.
So Big Guy might be a film in 2048. Who knows? Yeah. But thank you for saying so. That's a story that took a lot out of me to write, and which I'm very, very proud of, even though I'm afraid to go back and reread it.
Yeah. If you're a teacher, Big Guy is such a great story to read. I mean, the way you end it, I won't give it away, but the way you end it has stuck with me ever since. I mean, wow, yeah. What a final scene.
Thank you. It is about, and because this too, Brian, being a teacher means you leave, almost all of your private life at the door, except you don't really.
Yeah.
Making up examples of things on the fly is always colored by the stuff that we're trying to work out about being better human beings. But it is ultimately, I'll say this for your watchers and listeners, it's a story about a guy who thinks that he needs to lose 100 pounds in order to be a better human being.
Yep.
And mild spoiler, that's not his problem.
Exactly.
But it at least starts as kind of a weight loss journey and becomes something very different.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, you have 3 books out. I recommend all of our listeners go check it out. We're in Trouble. Did you mention your first story collection from 2005? Another really strong collection too.
I didn't, because I wrote that when I was a baby. But yeah, We're in Trouble. That's a really good book too. I think both my story collections are better than my novel, and the novel's pretty good, but the story collections are better.
Yeah. So
that's my plea to everybody who might encounter this, is to go give some short stories a try. I like to think I've got good plots. Like I get shelled in the literary section, but We're in Trouble's got a couple of stories that were perceived as mysteries.
Okay.
Crime stories. So give it a shot.
Yeah. And do you have anywhere else our listeners can find you online? Do you have a website or anything you'd like to promote?
ChristopherCoake.info. .info, because I had ChristopherCoake.com and ChristopherCoake.net, and I don't take care of my websites very well and got hacked and are owned by other people. So ChristopherCoake.info, which I made for free on Wix.com, is where you can go to find the good stuff.
Okay, cool. Well, thanks, Chris, for being here. This was such a thrill to talk about the Omega Man with you. We have not chatted in many, many, many months.
I know, Brian. I know. We got to get coffee sometime soon.
Yeah. Now this summer, later this year, I would love to hang out with you in person. Chris was my advisor for my Master's of Arts degree, my first 2 years at UNR, but we worked together for 5 long years, right, Chris? I was there for a while. I got my MA degree and then my MFA in creative writing, and some of the best years of my life, Chris, has been spent with you in dark rooms talking about storytelling.
Well, thank you, Brian. And I hope that all your viewers and listeners know that you were a terrific fiction writer.
Oh, thank you.
One of these days, we're going to be talking about your novels.
I'm trying.
I know you are. I know.
Yep. I have a new one out to agents right now.
Okay.
Cross your fingers, Chris.
Yep.
All right. So thanks to all of you for listening. And thanks again, Chris, for being here today. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.